and thanks to the NFCA for having me. I'm excited to share and learn. All I have is me and my experience, and I hope that that might be able to help some people tonight. First of all, let me just say that I've never been a leadoff hitter in my life, so this is a first for me. But like Joanna said, my name is Pat Conlan. I'm the head softball coach at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. I am 48 years old, and I say that just so you know, I've will be beginning my 26th year of coaching. I currently live in the suburbs of DC in Northern Virginia. I have been with my wife, Shannon, for 11 years and have been happily married for over 8 now. And we're both from New England, so we grew up in the New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut environment, which was very progressive. So we went back home to Massachusetts to get married in 2012, where same-sex marriage had been legal since the early 2000s. We are lucky to have 3 amazing boys. We have twin boys who just turned 6 last month, Hayden and Owen. They just finished kindergarten on Zoom, so you can imagine how what a circus that was. And we have a 3-year-old boy named Reed. So if you go back to my age, I'm 48 and I have a pair of 6-year-olds and a 3-year-old. So really what that means is I'm just tired all the time. Like I said earlier, I grew up in Connecticut, which was, like I said, a relatively progressive state. But I went to a Catholic school for 12 years. So while I always knew I was gay, there was never a question about that. My experiences never really played out until I went to college. I went to the University of Connecticut, and ultimately that became my kind of unofficial coming out period to my friends and teammates. I was never ashamed of who I was. I just was always very private. But I didn't actually come out into the real world myself, to my family, to my colleagues, until I was almost 30 years old. Like many of you, I really worked hard to keep my life private. And I'm happy for the younger generation today because I don't think they need to do that. But I couldn't stand it anymore. And a decade later, I came out to my mom at 30 years old. And that was an interesting conversation because I had a lot of ugly crying as I was trying to get it out of my mouth. And after a very emotional reveal, she kind of looked at me and responded with, "That's all? God, with how much crying you were doing, I thought you were dying." So she made it easy for me to move on in the rest of my life. And so I spent years not ashamed of who I was, just silent. And I think that was even more difficult in the end. And sadly, during those years, many of my colleagues who were wonderful people and my players and other family members never actually knew the real me. So after coaching stints at Fairfield University, I coached at NC State, I coached at UConn for 6 years. I finally landed at what I now call my dream job at Georgetown. Like I said, where I began my 16th year of coaching. I found my home. I have a place that I love going to work, a place and people who truly accept and embrace me and my family. And while many people keep changing jobs to find a level of happiness, whether it's professionally or personally, I've been able to find it at Georgetown, and I'm very lucky to say that my coaching colleagues, my AD, my administration, my president of our university really embraces us. And who would have thought that I've come full circle at a Jesuit Catholic school, and that would be the place that had the open arms for me, and truly allows me to be authentically me. So I'm glad to be here, and hopefully that you just have a little background on me, and I look forward to sharing tonight.
Thank you, Coach Conlan. Appreciate you. Christian Conrad, Florida State University, you're up next. Sarah, take it away.
Hi, my name is Kirk Conrad. I'm the current volunteer assistant coach here at Florida State University. First, I just wanted to say thank you for having me on this awesome panel. I actually was able to hear the last Educate to Elevate, and it was really inspiring to hear other people's experiences. So just thank you for having this, and thank you for letting me be a part of it. I'll say I will probably the youngest in the group. I am turning 23 on Friday, so I'm kind of in that new generation of people that do kind of get to grow up and be openly gay, but it was still very hard for me. I grew up in Texas. I was like in Fort Worth, Texas. That's where I grew up. And it was pretty challenging because no one was really openly gay. And like, I didn't really know who gay people were. And I mean, I kind of had an idea when I was in middle school, but I mean, I did like ballet in elementary school. And I mean, not until I was in college, I was like, oh, my teachers were gay. Like I had no idea because I wasn't able to make that connection. So it was hard growing up without having like a visible person in my life that was gay and understanding like they could be successful in their careers. And so a lot of my like knowledge of gay people were from movies and television, and that was just, I mean, kind of not realistic. I mean, I'm watching Dallas Buyers Club. I'm like, well, this is going to be great, you know, but it's not, and that's not the case anymore. Thanks to all the help that other people have been able to have for our community. So actually growing up in Texas, I worked for a high school coach who she was lesbian, and getting to be around her, I will say that was pretty inspiring to see them. But again, their relationship was kind of covered, like they weren't able to be openly married even though they were. So that was also kind of hard, thinking like, okay, if I'm going to coach in softball, I can be married, but they have to be, you know, my roommate. Like they can't openly be married. And then after high school, I graduated, and then I moved up to the University of Oregon, where, I mean, totally different spectrum. Like anyone could be whatever they wanted to be, and it was so awesome. And then I started coming out. So I came out to my friend Jerry Ann first, and then I came out to Coach Spencer and Kylie Quico, who at that point, like they were Coach Spencer and them, where they were so able to be openly gay and so proud of it. And that was so awesome to see their experiences. And I was like, wow, I can coach in college and I can be openly proud of who I am. And that was just really awesome to have them there. And I honestly don't know if I would have come out if I wasn't able to be around them. And then after that, I started dating in high school or in college. And then I didn't come out to my parents until about a week before I went back up for my senior year of college. And it wasn't even me. I didn't like start the conversation. My mom just asked me the question of like, oh, your friend Alex, what's that about? And then I finally told them. I'm so glad I did. And then slowly but surely, I started being more public with it. And then now I moved here to Florida State, and I'm able to live as authentic as I can. And it's really amazing. And there's actually a community here that I can be a part of, and I can still feel safe coaching at Florida State and being who I truly want to be. And it's just really awesome that I get to stand on the shoulders of giants and people that came before me.
Thank you, Christian. Appreciate your perspective. Dr. Meg Hancock. Meg, you want to go ahead?
Awesome. Yes. Again, thank you so much for the invitation to participate. I have to say that I am completely geeking out a little bit here because I am seeing so many different worlds collide. I have former students on this call. I have former colleagues on this call. And it's so incredibly exciting and gratifying to see these worlds come together. So thank you. I'm currently an Associate Dean of Student Success and Academic Affairs at the University of Louisville. I also hold an associate professor appointment with our sport administration program, which is how I know a number of individuals on this call. But you know, working in a college environment is certainly one of the greatest privileges of my life because it's an opportunity to not only work with college students who are in some of the most formidable and formative years of their lives, but when you're in an environment where people are continually wanting to learn or being pressed to learn and evolve, it's critically important. So I use pronouns she, her. I am married, and like Pat, I mean, pretty similarly, we've been together 11 years and we've been married, I'm gonna get in trouble, 7. So my wife is a nurse practitioner. I think what is important to know is I am originally from Kentucky. And to give you all some context too, I'll turn 40 later this year. So while we've made significant progress across the nation and in our state, being a young person in Kentucky when I was in middle school and high school and really beginning to come to grips with my sexual orientation as part of my identity, it was a really scary place. And so I was not out at the time. I was in high school. When I went to college, I played basketball at a small Division III institution and was actually outed to my parents by my coach, which I can look back at and kind of chuckle at now, but it was not a good experience in that way. It was a conversation that I wanted to have in my own time, and had planned to do it, but she beat me to the punch. That's okay. It happens, but lesson learned. And I'm always happy to share kind of what that experience is like from my perspective. But once I left college, I went to a women's college. So it was a very safe environment to be out. When I went to graduate school, I moved to an area in the Midwest where I had to essentially go back in the closet because it was not a physically safe environment to be in, and definitely presented some challenges. So once I graduated with my master's degree, I moved up to New Hampshire and worked at Dartmouth College in a few different capacities there, but I worked in athletics for a few years. And being in New England itself was very liberating in a sense, because I just did not have to really think about my sexual orientation. I didn't have to navigate it as much as I thought that I would. So it wasn't necessarily a truly salient identity for me. It was part of who I was, but it also allowed me to really explore and venture other things, both personally and professionally, because I wasn't carrying that weight around with me of, oh gosh, who should I tell? Who can I tell? Will this be professionally damaging? Will it hurt personal relationships? Because those are some of the dialogues that I would typically go through. Fast forward about 4 years in New Hampshire, I decided it was time to go back to school and get my PhD. I also wanted to be closer to family. And lo and behold, the University of Louisville had a PhD program. And so I was very hesitant, but I decided to move back to Kentucky. Now, if you know anything about Kentucky, it's that the entire state, when I'm talking in terms of athletics, the entire state is blue, meaning that you root for the University of Kentucky, and Louisville is red, right? So I went from blue to red. It was a place that I never thought I'd live. Now it's a place that I'm not sure that I'll leave. But it was very inspiring to walk onto campus in the fall of 2009 and see a pride event in which students were wearing rainbow t-shirts and fully embracing the LGBTQ culture on campus. And Louisville is one of the top LGBTQ campuses in the nation. And I think we're still #1 in the South region. So it's been very gratifying and comforting to work at this university, though we have we got a long way to go. So just to let you all know, I do teach. Right now I'm teaching a course called Athletics and Higher Education. I also teach one on student athlete services, where we delve into identity development, like race, LGBTQ, any number of gender identity. So I'm happy to talk about that as well. But again, I'm just really grateful to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Moving on, Coach Amanda Scott from Missouri St. Louis. Coach Scott, you want to go ahead?
Hey, everybody. I'm the head coach here at UMSL, getting ready to start my 5th year. And the University of Missouri St. Louis, we're a D2 program, just outside, I guess, of the city here. And we are in the GLVC conference. I got to give a shout out to my GLVC people on the call, and also to all my D2 humans. I have kind of been a little bit everywhere in coaching. Born and raised Californian. I played college ball for Margie Wright at Fresno State. And then I never looked back, and I only go to California the holidays now. I started at Michigan State with Jackie Joseph, and I've really been at a number of different size schools and also different levels, but I really feel like I've landed in my wheelhouse here, being in the city at a diverse campus. But like I said, I'm getting ready to start my 5th year here, and in my very first year here, actually on my on-campus interview, administration told me that there was a transgender student athlete in the department and that he played softball. And it was just kind of like, you know, like, wow, like I need to know everything about this. And so that is the perspective I'd like to share tonight. Any, you know, insight, perspectives. The student athlete at the time was in his senior season, and he really is a unicorn type human in a lot of ways. But he's actually the second transgender student athlete that I have had in my coaching career. But the first one was at Michigan State, actually, and had not yet really transitioned. Conversations were just there. And what really stuck to me in thinking about this panel was that human being, that was 14, 16 years ago. And that conversation then versus the conversation and experience with the student athlete here in the last couple of years, it's like it's a generation gap. It's crazy. And then I think also with that being my first job, I was a kid, and now I'm old and feel more established and that I know myself really well. And so that I think has made it easy to sit in that space. And so, you know, basically I'm thankful Brug didn't ask to talk about pitching drills because I'd rather talk about this stuff all over the place. I could talk about it for hours. So I'm extremely proud. I felt instantly proud to be asked to be on this panel and equally protective of my student athlete as well. Because, you know, he's fully transitioned now, but also got to celebrate the university I work at for being extremely just welcoming and supportive. And so anything I can offer tonight in that capacity, at its core, it's about an inclusive culture and how you build that, establish it, and maintain it. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate that. Next up, Brandy Stewart, University of Central Florida. Brandy, go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everybody, or wherever you are on the spectrum of the country. Good afternoon, I guess it would still be appropriate. So my name is Brandy Stewart. I am our Executive Associate Athletics Director and Senior Women Administrator at UCF. I too am very honored and gracious, grateful to be here tonight to have this discussion with y'all. I am a student in life. I'm a student of the game. I'm a student of just learning about different people. But I am always a champion for folks who need to have advocates. I am a true believer in everybody has an opportunity to experience everything in this world. So, you know, I find in my role as an administrator here at UCF that a lot of times I'm pushing the envelope for some of my counterparts who are used to more traditional settings and like things the way that they have always been for them, which are mostly homogeneous and really straight and white and male. So I've spent a lot of my time just trying to open the eyes and ears of the people that I work with to see outside of their little bubble and to recognize that if we're going to work in higher education and work in college athletics, that not only do we need to be intentional to our hiring practices and ensuring that we're hiring folks that are reflective of the people that we are serving, but also to just be mindful and intentional about how we lead and the types of environments that we provide, not only for our student athletes, but for our coaches and for our staff. And that is an ever-growing and continuous battle, but it's one that I am happy and willing to fight for everyone to be able to, again, have the opportunity, have a seat at the table, whatever that might look like, and be able to do it with an open heart and a happy heart. And so I am just truly excited to be here as an ally, as someone who's going to be learning from this group, in addition to just sharing some of my best practices as an administrator personally and professionally. I'm also from California, and I grew up in Southern California. I played softball at Florida State. But the one thing I think that I've been able to carry with me throughout not only my playing career, but as an administrator, the beautiful thing that I'm always proud of being a Californian is that we really do kind of live and let live, right? Like unless somebody is infringing on anyone else's freedoms or harming themselves or someone else, let people live, learn from each other, figure out how we can get better, how we can help each other, how we can all continue to grow, be better, and be excellent in whatever it is that we're trying to do. And I truly try to live that every single day, and help, like I said, my counterparts to be able to, if they can't get there every day, to remind them of why we're here, who we serve, and what our obligation and responsibility is. Again, not only to our student athletes, but to our coaches and our staff, and the environment that we cultivate in athletics. And so that doesn't just stop here in Orlando at UCF. That's something that I speak with my counterparts across the country about. And I'm always happy to celebrate diversity, inclusion, difference on any spectrum, and then how I can be a better servant to our kids and our student athletes, to help them continue to thrive and understand that regardless of where you come from, what you do, how you live, what you believe, that everyone has an opportunity to be great. So in my lifelong classroom, I am sitting here as a student, in addition to a teacher's assistant. So however I can help, I'm so happy and thrilled to be here. And I just appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. Appreciate that. And last but not least, Kirk Walker from UCLA. Coach Walker, go ahead.
Well, first of all, it's such a great honor to be on this call, number one, and to sit back and look, I am the senior person on the call. Pat, I'm actually a little older than you. Obviously coached against you for a long time, but I recruited Amanda. We played against Brandy. I'm like, this is like kind of making me feel like really old when I start looking at this. But it's such a great honor to be here on the panel with everybody, but also in front of the NFCA audience. Really, my story's been pretty publicized along the way, but certainly to kind of step back, to kind of go through my journey. When I left UCLA, I had been there, been very successful. We'd had great championships there. And I left there, part of what I realized now was for me to figure out who I was. While I was coaching at UCLA, I wasn't venturing over to West Hollywood, which was all of 4 miles away. I had not really allowed myself to really figure out who I was. And part of that was I was ingrained in coaching. So what I realize now is that my move to Oregon, to coach at Oregon State, was not only for a coaching position, but it was really about my journey to find myself. And during that process, obviously when I got up to Oregon State, was so focused on building the program that it took a few years for me to start to kind of figure out how now I need to figure out who I am. And during that process, obviously met a person that was going to be my partner for 18 years. During that process, I slowly would come out to different people, peers here and there. It was something that I was very comfortable being who I was, but I was still not sharing it with anybody. And lo enough, about 9 years into our relationship, we decided that adoption was really going to be important. We were both wanted to be parents, and going through that adoption process kind of escalated some conversations. As an open adoption, my picture was going to be in a public space. And my greatest fear at that moment in time was not that my peers would know, or even my bosses would know, because many of them already knew. My greatest fear was that my team was going to hear about it from somebody other than me. If there was an aunt or a sister that was giving a child up for adoption, and they might see my image and then say something to my team. So that was really the big impetus that I decided to go ahead in the fall of 2005, fall of 2005. We were coming off a very successful year, and I just felt like I need to tell my team. And in that process of telling my team in 2005, it was amazing. It was fantastic. The team, all the thing they wanted to know was about the baby, and was it a boy or a girl, and when was, what was the name, when that was coming. So what I started to realize is that it was a huge weight off my shoulders. And at the time, a friend of mine had been running a website called Outsports. He'd started it for about 10 years earlier. And he had always said, hey, whenever, you are okay with it, let me do a story. And I'm like, sure. So finally, after telling my team, which was my greatest fear, I just said, go for it. I'm a softball coach. Nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to, know about it. And it kind of got escalated pretty quickly, and obviously went to Outsports, then to the Portland Tribune, then to ESPN magazine, and then to the the Daily News in New York. And then Logo TV came out. So for about the rest of the year was media attention everywhere. And I didn't really realize the impact until Logo TV was doing a feature, and they put the microphone in front of my mouth and they said, "So you're the first publicly out Division I coach in any sport." And they said, "What do you think about that?" And I was floored. And I said, "Well, no, I'm not. I've been coaching for a long time. I know plenty of coaches that might fall into the LGBT category." And they put the microphone under my mouth and said, "Who?" And that's when I realized the world that we had been living in, as was described here, which was, I could have my life, I just can't put it in front of anybody. And so at that point in time, it really flipped a switch for me to realize that visibility was going to be really paramount in my journey moving forward. So at that point in time, became very active, got connected to Nike. Nike signed me that year. We went on to have our most successful year at Oregon State, all the way to the College World Series. Part of that was my team was bonded because of my sharing of my story. And also part of it was that they felt safe in who they were and who they could be. So to me, the visibility became a really important part of the journey. Over the last 15 years since then, obviously I've moved back to UCLA, coaching there. It's wonderful, it's great. I've been a part of several big moves with Nike and with the LGBT Sports Coalition, and now running 2 nonprofits that are really about visibility and creating a network for LGBT coaches and student athletes. And one of them is called Go Space. We have over 900 current and former student athletes from across the country in every sport. And then ECA, Equality Coaches Alliance, who many of the people on the call here are members. So I want to give it a shout out. I noticed as they were coming in, which has over 950 members, coaching, administrators, officials, umpires, people that work professionally in sports from the professional level, collegiate level, and high school. And that to me has been one thing that's been really amazing for me to be a part of, because it's about building that community and creating a safe space for people to be out if they can be. But if they can't be, then they can still have a community where they have peers that are accessible to them. So that's my quick story on that. I'm super excited to be here. I think everybody on this panel is incredible, and I thank you for being here. I thank you for your visibility, and I love being able to be a resource in any way.
Thank you, Kirk. Appreciate that. We're going to get into the questions. So again, get those in the chat if you haven't already. 6 panelists, so we won't come to every panelist on every question, but they know they have full right to take off the mic and start screaming, "Joanna, I got something, I got something." So if at any time you want to add, feel free. Pat and Meg, first one coming to you. What are some challenges you've faced as a coach in dealing with less diverse or inclusive universities? Pat, how about you go first?
I'm actually probably not the right person to answer this question, because while early on in my coaching career, I may not have had the resources, but I didn't know, I wasn't searching them out. I'm at a place right now for 16 years that has quite a number of resources for our student athletes and our overall student body at Georgetown. I'm also lucky because I work for an athletic director who has begun a diversity and inclusion committee, and is actually hiring somebody full-time to oversee that in our athletic department. So he has allowed me to be me, and I've actually not run into that situation.
Thank you, Pat. Meg, how about you? Anything on that one?
Sure. I think if we looked across the spectrum of college and universities, we'd have those that we might consider to be more conservative, and those that we might consider to be a little bit more liberal, whether it's regard to sports or academics, whatever it might be. I've walked on a campus before and knew from the moment that I walked on there during a job interview that it was not the place where I should be. And while they were doing what they could do to be progressive and to provide support services specifically for LGBTQ people, I knew at that moment in time that was not necessarily going to be the right move for me, but it did start me thinking about, okay, if it's not the right move for me, the next person who moves into this role, or the next student that comes onto this campus, what is their experience going to be like? And so for me, that kind of led toward a personal philosophy of, if I am in an environment where I have to check, is it safe for me to be out or is it not? And when I say, is it safe for me to be out, I mean, in terms of employment, is it physically safe? Is it professionally safe? Am I going to be left out of meetings or included in things? So, you know, even though we know now that there's federal legislation that protects sexual orientation, up until 2 weeks ago, there wasn't. And so there was this constant dialogue in my mind when I interacted with people about, what should I do? How should I engage in this situation? And so when we're thinking about inclusive environments, often we find that as we're seeing with conversations about racial injustice and police brutality and the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black experience in general, a lot of people are really just afraid to talk about it and to engage in those conversations that are deemed or perceived to be uncomfortable. And I think often when we're talking about sexual orientation or gender identity, people have kind of the same reaction. Well, I'm not sure how to talk about it. And so it's really kind of, for me, it was about inviting that conversation in. I'm not one who tends to call people out necessarily, but it's like, let's talk about why you have that perception or what you meant by using that phrase. Because it's that small conversation that can lead to building more inclusive environments. And so I think that that's one of the, as we think about building allies and having allies on campus or allies on our teams or allies in our communities, those relationships have started because there's been a relationship built. And in that relationship, there's an understanding that someone is being treated differently, often badly in a way that is preventing them from really having access to resources, having access to information. And so it's really thinking about, how can we engage in those relationships that will allow us to have conversations that will start to build more inclusive environments. It is tough work, and it's not something where one conversation is going to do it. It has to be, again, it's a relationship. We have to continually work on our relationships, or they die, they go by the wayside. And so it's really thinking about, what energy and response do I have? For me, I do feel like it is my responsibility to educate and to have conversations, both with people who identify in the LGBT community and those who don't. But not everyone in the LGBT community feels that way. So it really is a process for me of engaging with other people and building those relationships to build those allyships and those inclusive environments.
Thank you very much. Next question. Let's go, Brandy and Amanda. Let's come to you two on this one. How do you handle coworkers or administrators who might not share inclusive beliefs? Brandy, you want to go first?
Yep, sorry, it took me a minute to get my unmute. Yeah, so coworkers who have a tough time arriving to 2020. I usually try to encourage them to, well, first I try to understand, like, where is the roadblock? What is it that is keeping you from understanding that we're all different? We all have, different backgrounds, walks of life. Preferences, like what is it that is creating this block for you that you can't get past it and just see people for who they are? I've been learning a lot in most recent conversations about social injustice in general, that people are hiding behind, well, I just didn't know, or that just has never been a part of my world. And so I try to use those moments as educational opportunities for everybody. And try to get them to think outside of themselves. I think what I've realized recently is that, a lot of people are very uncomfortable being uncomfortable and having conversations that they feel like They have to take a stance one way or another, and that supporting people who may be different from them compromises their values. So I have the luxury in the position that I hold here that I'm privy to a lot of different types of conversations, and I'm able to insert myself strategically sometimes that help guide some conversations for folks. So what I try to do is, one, understand their perspective. Two, try to get them to understand the perspectives of other people and just like the journeys for other people. And then I try to get them to realize, to like personalize this. We're human beings. We all come to the table with differences wherever they may lie. But we're all human beings. We're all here for our kids. We're all here for our universities and our athletic departments. So we need to be able to accept people for who they are. You love people, you don't have to like them, but you know, if we say that we're a family, we have to walk the talk. And so, you know, just like you have with your kids, just like some of, you know, most of the time I'm the only female in a room. So I'm dealing with mostly white men. And I remind them quite often that if it weren't for me knowing their wives, I wouldn't know that they'd have any redeeming qualities about them. And most of the conversations that we have, but I give them the benefit of the doubt. But just to remind them, like, listen, you know, we are all people. We're all here to try to be great. We're trying to contribute to the success of this institution. And the only way that we can do that is if we can come to a point where we accept each other. You may not always agree with what I have to say. You may not always agree with the way that we live. You may not agree with how I raise my child. However that might be, you have your own perspectives, you have your own opinions, but at the end of the day, like, let's have enough mutual respect for each other and let's have enough love for each other that we can at least try to find some common ground. And so I find myself mediating quite frequently and trying to get some people to just step outside of themselves and be comfortable in the uncomfortable. And I am taking full advantage of these moments and these opportunities to force some of these conversations that most of the people that I work with would never have to have because it's not a part of the life that they live. I'm lucky that a lot of our administrators have kids. And so I try to bring it home to, like, what if this was a member of your family? What if this was somebody that you cared about? How would you want somebody to treat your daughter? How would you want somebody to treat your son? How would you, you know, I try to personalize it and just remind folks that at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we all deserve the basics of respect, love, and treating people with integrity. And so that's how I try to get people to step outside of their comfort zones, because a lot of times that's what it is. I try to come from a place that people aren't operating in intentional isms or ists, whether it's, you know, racism or sexism, bigotry, whatever those things are that they may present themselves. I just try to say, okay, so maybe you just haven't been exposed to this. So let's figure out how we can get you to a place where you can be a little more educated, you can understand a little bit more, so that, again, like, we're finding some common ground. You want people to treat you with respect and understand that you may be from the South or you may be from the North, or wherever baggage you're carrying comes from. Other people have that too. So if we can all understand why we're here, then let's figure out how we get from point A to point B. And, you know, I try to continue to live in the uncomfortable and bring people along with me, and keep the big picture in mind. So I hope that answers the question.
Got it. Thank you, Brandy. Appreciate that. Amanda, thoughts? Same question?
Yes, I'd like to just say same 100% to everything Brandy just said. And then I also want to move to Florida and be friends with her. So I'll go a little bit smaller scale and try not to repeat too much. So you know, what she has to offer from an administrative standpoint, and then maybe just like a single, you know, coach of just one sport. And this is something that, you know, in the program I'm a part of is the staff, we really try to build these same ideas and concepts starting with our 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, right? So it's kind of like talking about your leadership to your kids and how you want to, you know, get people on board as you're competing. It's like, start with one. you don't have to get all 18. You don't have to get all 20 on the same page. And as Brandy started talking, I instantly thought about, I think it was last summer in our department, we had allied training, the whole department. And so we're sitting in this big space and we're in our little pods, you know, and for our activities. And no, I don't know that anyone's extremely comfortable. I think people are on board and they want to learn. And then you have some that are like, this is dumb. I can't believe I have to be here today. And you can see it. And you just, I always joke, I pray that I'm not in that group. But that group is the issue, right? Because they're dealing with the same 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And I agree with Brandy. It's like, what is the disconnect? And I'll give a specific example of my first year here in, with our transgender student athlete. And one of the members of our staff constantly referring to him as her and being very deliberate about it. And it's, we're a small school. You can't, you know, or not that it's okay anywhere, but like it's put it on blast when this person was doing it. And I just thought, really, like, can we not just step out and say, like, what this, our human is going through, how brave, how all these things, and really you just intentionally calling him her. But I think you can make assumptions and say it's generational. You could say, you know, male and female. I could say the same thing for young people in my department who pass it off like, oh yeah, I'm fine there, and not really like getting into the roots of it, as well as I can watch the older generations who they're going to coach you for the rest of their lives and they do the same thing over and over and over and over. And I can't be bothered with how the world is changing. And I think at the school I'm at now, I try to take care of my program first and then try to almost have that be as an example kind of emulating out. And then constantly tell our kids that we have got to be resources for their friends and their communities. And where you think someone needs help, you can come to us, come to me and say, this person needs help, this person's going through this. And then I'm gonna go up the chain of command as well and make sure that even if it's a tennis player, a golf player, a soccer player, we can still take care of those people. But at the end of the day, yes, Brandy, 100%, I think it comes down to being uncomfortable, not wanting to sit in the conversation or checking a box on a day, you know, at training in July and saying, oh, I did that, cool, I'll put my sticker on the wall. But it's more than that. And it's gotta be consistency over time to build the trust in your communities.
Thank you.
Joanna, can I jump in there? So, I mean, those two have nailed it. It's brilliant. I'm going to throw one other thing in there because we live in athletics. One thing that I always talked about with my team prior to me coming out was the strength in our team, the strength of us as a unit on the field was our diversity. If we were all power hitters or we were all slappers or we were all, you know, one-dimensional, we wouldn't be as strong as a team. So I've always talked about the diversity of what we bring softball-wise is important. And you take that same analogy to a basketball coach or a football coach and understanding that, look, coaches understand diversity. They understand having different components, but they understand it in an athletic perspective. All you have to do is translate that to the characteristics and the personality traits that your players bring. We are stronger when we don't all have the same sense of humor. We're stronger when we all have had different life experiences and different diversity, because it's going to make us more resilient to whatever's coming at us. So within our own team, I think talking about athletics is the strength of any unit, organization, or team is in the diversity of the characteristics of our individual members. And then you start going from there and you start going into those uncomfortable conversations, as both Amanda and Brandy have talked about, that it's really important to be able to talk about it in all aspects, though. It's not just because you're having ally training. To me, being an ally these days is nothing more than being a good person. That's it. Being an ally is a good person. It doesn't require training. And I get a little bit angry when it's always about checking off a box and are you listed as an ally? Like, really? Are you a good person? Do you understand that we all are human beings? That doesn't take training. I do value ally training, don't get me wrong. I think opens up the right conversations. But at the end of the day, somebody that can't be a quality person, it's a reflection back on their character as a good person, not that they haven't become educated enough or I didn't really get it. And so those are my two other takes on that. Sorry.
No apologies, Kirk. No apologies. Thank you. Next question, Christian, let's come to you on this one. And then anybody else that wants to add, of course, feel free. Student athletes in the LGBT community, how would you suggest providing the best resource for the student athletes? What do you find that student athletes need from their coaches at this time? And what advice would you give to other coaches who are trying to provide resources to those student athletes?
Yeah, so with this question, I know like from my perspective going to college, it was kind of difficult because it's like you didn't really know who to talk to. Like you didn't know like people, if they weren't like openly like an ally, it's like, well, can I talk to you? Like, are you like homophobic? Like, am I gonna get yelled at here? Like, it's just really hard to understand and who I can be comfortable around. So being more open and putting that in your values as a team, that's one of the things we do at Florida State here. It's like family is one of our most important values, and saying that we, basically what Kirk said, the diversity is what makes us stronger. And having that as a key component of our team ethics is huge for us. And then one thing we actually had at Oregon when I was a student there was we had the Be Oregon campaign that started, I believe, my sophomore year of college. And so what we did was every sports program for one game each year, we had our Be Oregon game. And we wore these like rainbow BP tops and these hats. And they actually said that sport is not interested in what you believe or who you love. Sport builds bridges and brings people together. Sports demands to be played and all ducks come to play. Be true, be Oregon. And I know it like seems like, well, I mean, it's just a t-shirt before a game, like it doesn't really matter, but I know to me and the gay players on our team and the other gay staff members, like that was a huge thing for us to know that our university had our back and we were able to be proud in who we were and be able to play the sport that we loved. So I thought that was a huge thing. And I think like every university should be able to have that in their programs. And that was just a really awesome thing to have. And then another big thing that I think is important, that when we do have these allies and we do have people there trying to make connections, that we need to be able to support them as well. Because when actually we had Coach Lombardi at Oregon, you know, I'm sitting in this coffee shop next to these people that didn't know I worked for the softball team, and they're sitting there saying, you know, like, oh, have you heard Coach Lombardi's, you know, hates gay people? And to hear that was so hurtful, because not only was that not true, like this is a woman that has accepted me, has accepted, you know, my friend Sierra, and she's like given me marriage advice. Like she has totally been open arms and communicate with me that she understands where I'm coming from and she like fully supports me. So I actually turned to those people and said, sorry, that's not the case. And can you please stop spreading those rumors? So I think it's just as important for other people to look at us and be able to support us and to be able to support them as well.
Thank you, Christian. Anyone else, anything to add on that one?
You know, Joanne,
I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead.
You know, I think it's really important to make sure that as coaches, we are modeling the behavior that we want to see in our programs. And one of the things, you know, when we're talking about, you know, kids, they're 17, 18, 19 years old and maybe have not had anybody to talk to who understands. And whether you're straight or gay, I think it's important to make sure that we're doing a lot more listening to our kids and that we're asking questions and that we're inquiring. We're taking the time, you know, to give our student athletes, you know, the ability to speak openly and honestly about themselves and their personal lives. And when we do that, our teams are made stronger. But those kids who might feel like they're on an island or isolated really need that from the coaches. And I know if you are somebody who is a straight coach and you're uncomfortable with that conversation, your team is going to be uncomfortable with it. And so it really needs to start with the behavior that you're going to model to the rest of the team.
Yeah, I wanted to feed right off of that. Pat, I think that was well stated. And I think understanding that we as coaches, we spend our whole lives having all the answers, and we want to have all the answers. We want to look knowledgeable in front of our team. But when it comes to a lot of times this issue or any of these personal issues that athletes are going through, we don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to be an expert in anything. But just like Pat just mentioned, we have to have the ability to listen. The ability to listen to an athlete is the most important thing we can do, because every single one of our athletes is dealing with some kind of insecurity, whether it be their sexual identity or they have a learning disability or where they grew up or their parents are going through a divorce or whatever it might be. So understanding that we don't have to have all the answers, but the first thing is we have to be a good listener. Once we're a good listener, they're going to tell us where we need to go find the resources for them. And that's really important. So we may not have all the resources that they have needed at that moment, but by listening really effectively, we can then get them to the right resources or find the right resources to be valuable. And they're there on campuses. You know, I think first and foremost with any of our student athletes that are dealing with the struggles of sexual orientation or sexual identity is their ability to kind of feel valued and safe. So our first thing is to figure out how can we make sure that they're feeling safe. And then the second thing that we can do is how do we get them connected to people that can empathize and be a resource for them, whether that be other student athletes, other coaches, or services on campus. I think that just becomes really important for us to be the conduit, and we don't have to have all the information in our own heads all the time.
Thank you.
So sorry. Go ahead, Amanda.
I was just, sorry, Randy. I was just go a little bit further with Kirk on that is, so like what that looks like to me is sitting in a space where you don't know the answer and being willing to say, I don't know the answer right now, but I hear you, I support you, and I'm going to help you. So I just need some time to figure out what this looks like going forward. And that can be any issue out there. And so it's being vulnerable enough to say, I don't know. I totally don't get it and I don't know, but man, am I going to just bust my ass to get us both there. And then also kind of to back up with Pat too, is because I just wrote it down as one of the main things is understanding that we may be the safe space for young people. They may be coming from a space that isn't healthy, isn't supportive, that they're nervous, that they know they won't be accepted. And so when they come to college in this transformative time, we may be the platform in the safe space for them to start asking questions and to being brave and kind of being vulnerable there. So I just wanted to kind of add those two parts into those two. Sorry, Brandy.
No, you're okay. The last thing I would add from an administrator's perspective, one of my biggest pet peeves, and as an administrator, I know my role. I'm here to support. I'm here to help. I'm also, here to keep it real with my coaches and with my student athletes. And so for the coaches on this call, I would also say, like, really know who you're recruiting. And like, don't recruit the talent, recruit the person. And if you're not willing, like, be honest with yourself too, right? Like, if you know that somebody's got too much baggage for you, regardless of what that baggage might look like, then don't bring them into your program. Understand your staff, your university, the resources that you have. Because I always tell my coaches, like, okay, so I'm more than willing to help you with any issues that you may be having on your team with your student athletes. But did you not know these kids before you brought them into your program? Like, don't come to me with like, oh my God, I can't believe all this drama and this and that. And it's like, well, is this new to you? Did you not spend time with them or their parents, or did you not see how they interacted? And if you did, and you brought this person on because they just may be a hell of a talent, but you weren't equipped to help support them as a person, then as an administrator, me and the coach are going to have a conversation about that, because these kids don't ask to be a part of our programs. We're going out and recruiting them. So that's the other thing that I would say is, as coaches, also just be honest with who you are, where you're currently working, and is this going to be an environment that is conducive for growth individually, personally, as a softball player, for your student athlete too. So I just wanted to add that from that perspective, is I think we get lost in that sometimes too, is like, oh, I didn't even know this was going to happen. Okay, well, that's a lie. Either you didn't recruit that kid, or you weren't honest with yourself about who you are or who they are and where they fit into your program.
Joanna, can I pose a question to the group? So one of the things that you said, Brandy, I think was really important is this alignment of values. And in athletics, teams have the opportunity to kind of really create their own value systems, and you can recruit athletes into that, and you can recruit coaches into that. But what I'm wondering is, when you are part of the larger athletic department, and maybe that athletic department doesn't necessarily have the same values that you have as a coach or as an administrator, can some panelists talk a little bit about, A, if they've had that experience, and B, how you go about navigating that? Because I think value alignment is really critical to the success of a team, to the success of coaches, and to the success of an organization.
This might be harsh, but I am a true believer that if the university or your administration doesn't align with your value system, you need to find a different place to be. And because, you know, we coach softball, but it doesn't define us. It is really about, you know, our well-being and the life we live. And it's a place that obviously we go off to work, but the value system is everything. And if it doesn't align, find another place to go.
Yeah, and I would jump right off that. I agree, Pat. I think that, and this is even true when we're talking about coaches, whether you feel you're safe or not to come out. Obviously, your personal safety is always important. But if you don't feel safe being who you are authentically, the first thing you should be looking at is a new job market. Because why would you want to be somewhere that you couldn't feel safe being yourself or be valued? So that's really important. As we're talking about, though, this is a great question, Meg. I think oftentimes we as coaches, though, we think the value system of the athletic department might be one thing because we haven't really pushed the envelope. I'll take my situation at Oregon State to be example. Obviously, the campus and the university had these great values and they spewed these great values and it was wonderful. And I saw it in action. In our athletic department, it was very monochromatic. It was very homogeneous, as Brandy said. And there wasn't some of these dialogues that were happening. But I knew that ultimately it just required getting uncomfortable. So once I was in a position where my visibility was a fact, it's like, great, this is a chance for us to have greater conversations to make sure that the value systems in our athletic department matched our university. Because I think that's where we as coaches, we owe it to our university and our allies and our peers in our department to not assume that their values don't match just because I didn't ask or I didn't have the conversation. And what I found very quickly was not only was our department bought into those values, but the university threw gobs of money at me to bring people in so that we could have campus-wide conversations on all these topics on religion, intersection of religion and sexuality, all of these conversations. So again, sometimes we have to get uncomfortable to give our allies a chance to actually show themselves.
Thank you. Any other additions to that? All right, let's move on here. Next question. As a former student athlete, how did experiences with your coaches contribute positively or negatively to your overall experiences in terms of diversity, inclusion? Anyone in particular want to start that one? I'm gonna have to call on somebody.
Well, I'll start it because I mentioned it in my intro. So I would say I was playing basketball at the time, and I went home for winter break. This was my freshman year in college. And I had it all like planned out in my mind. I knew what I was going to say to my mom and dad. I was ready to go. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it after Christmas because I didn't want to be like, Merry Christmas, Mom and Dad, I'm gay. I knew that they would handle it well, but I was thinking about just the family dynamic with the holidays and all that stuff. So I went home and my parents were like, is there anything you want to tell us? Are you sure there's nothing you want to tell us? And I'm like, no, there's nothing that I want to tell you right now. Okay. And so I'm fending off. And then my dad, he's like, kiddo, let's go for a drive. Okay. So I know when my dad says, let's go for a drive, it means we're going to have some sort of in-depth philosophical or theological conversation. So I'm driving down the bypass with my dad in Richmond, Kentucky, because that's where I lived at the time. And we're chit-chatting about things, car goes silent. And he says, I know about your relationship with, and he named the woman that I was in a relationship with at that time. And I had this dialogue in my head, and I just said, you can tell him now, or you can just continue kind of living this lie, because that's what it felt like to me. And I said, Dad, what do you want me to say? And we had a great conversation, and he was wonderful. But I was like, how did you know? Like, that's, that was pretty factual information that you just provided me. And he told me that my coach and an administrator from our department had called them because they thought that the person that I was dating at the time was not a good influence. And, in my defense, of course, I'm going to defend that and just be like, the person I was dating was literally the poster child for our institution at that time. She was all over the marketing materials. So at that moment, I realized that while it had opened a door for me and allowed me to have a conversation with my dad and eventually with my mom and my sister, it took it away from me. And it was something that I really wanted to have a conversation with my parents about on my own time and in my own way. And I didn't have the opportunity to do that. And, it's really made me cognizant when I'm working with students or when I'm working with colleagues who, come out at any age, either, when they're younger or when they're much older, that it really is up to the individual to have that conversation in their own time. And it's very important that they're able to do that unless, they seek help in having that conversation. And so, it has really helped me mold and understand the way that I interact and work with people and think about how I can honor their identity, even though it's an identity that might not be visible or might not be known to other people. So I think about different ways that I can do that in my own interactions with them without, taking away that opportunity for them to share that piece of themselves with others.
Thank you, Meg. And we've got a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to get through several of these. Still, continue to chime in, and don't want to discourage any of that. But looking at this next one, being visible as a gay coach, how can you avoid political conversations with parents when your stance on human or civil rights doesn't always align? Kirk, let's start with you on this one.
Well, I think sexuality isn't politics. It isn't a political statement. There certainly is diversity when it comes to the political parties within our own LGBT community. So I think that first and foremost, as Brandy talked about, when you're having these conversations, a lot of times it's about getting to the point where you need to find out where this person is coming from, where the major roadblocks are in this conversation, and then be able to have a dialogue. I love debate, but more importantly, I love to be able to bridge a gap of communication. For me, my sexuality wasn't me making a stance politically. So, the first time that a recruit's parents asked about my wife, what she did, because she knew I had a baby, I said, no, my partner. Almost inevitably, there was a silence for a few seconds all the time. And then almost inevitably, again, the other parent of the recruit would speak up and go, oh my gosh, this is so cool. We've got a cousin, or we've got a brother, or my aunt, or, whatever. Like, everyone's got a gay friend. So I become this immediately accessible person. But there are times when you have interesting conversation with a parent. And I will never forget, I had a conversation with a parent and it got very awkward. And then there was never that other side of it. To me, I'm like, I don't know that I need to change this person's mind. I can be honest of who I am. I don't need to change their mind. But they've told me very clearly, as Brandy said, who they are. I don't know that I need to bring this person into my program. So that's certainly one thing. There are other conversations that I think are interesting. I know a story of a basketball recruit that was doing, a coach that was doing in-home visit. And the parents on the couch literally said, so coach, we want to kind of know, like, the whole, like, they were having a hard time spitting it out. Like, you know, do you have players that are like different, diverse lifestyles? And they kept using all these key words. And finally the coach said, well, I happen to be gay as well. And we have some players on our team that are gay. And that's a personal issue of someone's sexuality. What we focus on are our values as a team, our values on how we create a unit together and how we work together. Turns out, you know, that coach gets home and the recruit called and was apologizing, saying, Coach, my parents don't represent me. I don't feel that way. It's not a concern for me. And what you start to realize that there's sometimes you're not going to always be able to convince somebody of feeling something different. But I do think, as Brandy talked about, find out where their roadblocks are, where they're coming from, and then be able to kind of get to the baseline of what we have in common. What is it that we have in common? Even in the two political parties, we both want the country to succeed. There's a common value there. We just see about going after it differently. So I think that's the core at any diffusing of conflict.
Coach Conlan, anything to add on that one? Or sorry, Christian, was that you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, it's very hard to love someone that doesn't show vulnerability. And it's very easy to not understand someone and dismiss them when you don't try to get to know them. And so I actually worked with someone in college that, like, he was just totally other side of the spectrum, Republican, like, was not open-minded at all. I'm like, how do you live this life? And we just like butted heads the entire year. And then later on, he's like, hey, can you come play with me this summer in Boston? I'm like, I really don't want to, but I mean, I'll go play games, sure. And then, I mean, I'm there for maybe 10 minutes around like his friends, his family, his environment. And I'm like, I totally get it. I totally understand like where you're coming from. And then we were able to have better conversations after that. And so that, again, what Kirk was saying, like being able to have that common ground and understand where they're coming from was so important for us to build a better relationship. And we're still actually really good friends now. And I would just say, when you treat people with love, you're able to see the best version of themselves. And then versus just putting up a wall and just saying, you're wrong, you're homophobic, like you're totally the wrong way, then they're totally put off. You can't have that conversation. So I'm able to, if you're able to come in with it with that better understanding of like, oh, we do come from totally different backgrounds, you're able to be more sympathetic for each other. And hopefully it comes across the same way from them.
You know, I think the greatest day in my coaching career was not about a championship. It was about coming out to my team. And it was 16 years ago. It was my first year at Georgetown. And as a result of that, I've never hid from another parent, another recruit in the last 16 years. And I feel as a result of that, my team is far more diverse. They're far more open-minded. And because I'm making sure that those conversations are happening in the recruiting period. And I think that that's something that, you know, in my first 10 years of coaching, that I didn't lie about it. I just didn't share it. And so you could run into conversations with parents who don't believe in your lifestyle, or kids who are intolerant. And when I made that decision to come out to the team, like Kurt said, this weight gets lifted. You know, I have a wedding photo right on my desk, and right where parents can see it, right where recruits can see it. My kids are plastered all over my office. This is what we share. And if you don't like it, you can go find another school to be at. And I feel like that has promoted a real high level of tolerance is through the recruiting period, and making sure that I'm bringing in diverse kids as well who are open-minded, and parents who are open-minded as well. So, you know, it goes back further than just even kids who are right in your program at the time.
I think I want to jump on one other thing too, Pat. That was great. The whole thing, that lifestyle gets thrown out all the time, and it's this code thing that parents will say is like, well, we don't condone that lifestyle. And the one thing that when I start having that conversation and breaking it down, I'm like, okay, so there are a lot of different, your sexuality, your sexual orientation has nothing to do with your lifestyle. Your lifestyle, you can have, and we've all coached these athletes that were, you know, very promiscuous with half the football team, or, you know, that's a lifestyle, right? That's not, has nothing to do with sexuality. you know? So I think breaking down the barrier of understanding that not condoning a lifestyle, well, great. I don't condone that lifestyle either of being irresponsible. So this is what I would want for any of our athletes. And I know that it's a conversation that's coming out about inter-team dating, and I think it kind of goes to that. We'll get to that soon, hopefully. But I think that's really important, is that we should not be supporting the term lifestyle as defining by your sexuality, because that is absolutely not accurate.
A lot of segues here. We can go to a lot of different questions off of these couple answers. I always appreciate the easy segue. We do have questions about inter-team dating, if we want to jump to that one. What are things a coach needs to know or consider? How do you navigate that? Is there anything to navigate? You brought it up, Kirk. We'll let you go first, and then feel free to chime in, whoever's ready next. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the one thing that I always get to is everyone wants to know about this conversation about dating within your team when you start talking about sexuality. And I go back to the commonalities. I think it's really important that you talk about your relationships with each other on the team and how they interact, because we have a lot of relationships that we have to manage on our team. We've got roommates, we've got best friends, we've got people that come in that have known each other and have a history prior. There's a lot of different dynamics of relationships. Dating certainly is one of them. I will say that a strategy of saying no dating, there's no dating on your team, is probably, in my opinion, the worst thing you can do, because you're just going to encourage it to happen behind your back, which is then actually going to undermine your respect from the rest of the team, because they're all going to know and you're not. So it's not a great way to go. I think it's much healthier to say, look, if there is somebody that's dating on this team, the only thing that I as a coach am going to ask is that when we are together as a team, that means on the team bus, team meals, in the dugout, at the field, at practice, I want to make sure that it's team time and it's not individual time with your best friend or your roommate or somebody you're dating. So all I'm going to ask is, when we're on team time, that you be focused on all of your teammates and building relationships with all your teammates, so that we are as strong as we can be as a unit. And then certainly when they have their downtime or their personal time, I'm not going to necessarily dictate what they can and can't do. But I'm going to be very clear about what our standard is for the team. And so I think it comes down to having a conversation about what is that we're trying to do as a team and as a unit, and how the personal relationships that we have, whether you be fighting with your roommate, right? Who's left the dishes in the sink and they're not at practice and they're not talking. Like, okay, guess what? I'm going to have to say you can't live together now. No, what I need you to do is understand, I need you to leave your off field, your personal life, outside the gate. But when you walk through that gate, it's about team time. So to me, that's really the basis of where you start the conversation. And then from there, I think there's a number of great conversations to be had.
Anyone else, anything to add on that one? All right.
Sorry,
next,
Joanna, I do have
yeah,
one thing. Something that we tried to do with all of our student athletes and have conversations with our coaches and our staff about, and this is just in general, is just having deliberate conversations about healthy relationships versus abusive relationships, and just how they can impact a team, whether it's within a team or within the athletic department, whatever that looks like. And so again, while it may be uncomfortable to have a conversation with your student athletes about dating each other within the team, I think it's important that in general, as a life lesson, we have discussions about the parameters within healthy relationships and abusive relationships, so that we can all be better teammates and better neighbors to each other, to help navigate through some of those different components whenever anybody's in any type of relationship. So, I would just encourage folks, don't shy away from it. And as Kirk said, if you try to set rules and parameters against it, it's the rule. Kids are just going to do it the opposite of what you try to tell them to do in some of those regards. So help them help themselves, not only in the moment while they're here, but that's a life lesson that all of us should take with us and learn at some point, just for personal growth.
Thank you,
I'm sorry. The other piece, I think as a coach who may be uncomfortable with same-sex relationships, it's important to make sure that you you aren't in denial of what's happening under your nose, or you're just going to ignore it and hope it goes away, because the ignoring it has far more negative consequences than the actual relationship itself. So I think ignoring it certainly sets up problems down the road. But, you know, so even if you're uncomfortable, I really feel it's important to make sure that you do, you know, certainly have that conversation and address it, and then build out your guidelines as you see fit for your program.
Thank you very much. Samantha Ekstrand is on the call. Many of you know Samantha. She's our NFCA legal counsel, and know she's been collecting some notes and things to add. So I'm going to get her to chime in here on some various topics before we move on to the next question. Sam.
Right. Thank you. What great dialogue. A couple of quick points, quick hitters. I don't think you can prohibit dating on your team. Okay. You may have been able to do that 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I've had spirited conversations with Title IX offices across the country, and I think it's pretty clear. I understand some coaches' desire, as Kirk really described, to kind of, I wouldn't say control, but you know, recognize the influence of relationships within a team. And so they think if we ban one set, you're good. No more. So if you have that as a question or as an issue or concern, please feel free to, you know, reach out to me, and we can have a conversation to navigate that well. Brandy, I have to give you a shout out, recruit well. I mean, you're singing my song. Thank you, friend, for reinforcing that message. I think that really is the key to all of these issues, is finding, you know, good matches. And lastly, I would be remiss being on this conversation without pointing out the major Supreme Court case that came down 2 weeks ago. And I'm not sure, I feel like if I was a teacher back in my day, I would give a gold star to the person who would be able to say the softball connection to the Supreme Court case. So the title, it's actually a consolidation of 3 cases, and I won't get into super boring legal details at 9:20 on a Tuesday night, but is Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia. Gerald Bostock was an official in the juvenile court system with a stellar employment record for 10 years. And then he joined a gay softball league, and he talked about it at work. And that was considered in Georgia unbecoming of a county employee. So he sued, and it wound its way through the court. That was 2013. So I can tell you, friends, the wheels of justice grind very slowly. So 7 years later, you know, we have a holding that really is long overdue. But here it is. An employer who fires an individual merely for being gay or transgender violates Title VII. In bold, page 1, that's the takeaway. And I am thrilled. I've had coach clients who have had adverse employment action taken against them because of their sexual orientation. And I've had a very thin reed to stand on in advocating for them. And now there's a full-on big case with a crystal clear holding that sexual orientation, sexual identity are included as protected categories under Title VII. So that is a big day. Came as a huge surprise. The justices get assigned, and whoever writes the majority is kind of, you know, the main author of the case. Another fun fact, that was President Trump's appointee, Justice Gorsuch. So there you go, 2020, the year of unexpected. We got a great case on the books. And so I just want you to be proud of that softball connection, you know, be pleased that the judicial system has come a long way, and we are here on this issue. So thank you so much for letting me join, and it's love hearing the stories and the great takeaways, and what a fantastic group.
Thank you, Samantha. Appreciate that. Amanda, I want to come back to you. A question. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned in the process of coaching a transgendered athlete? And are there impacts on competition? Are there things that you wish you can either set the record straight on or educate folks on? And then anyone else who wants to join in after, of course, go ahead. But Coach Scott.
So that's a big question. So I guess what I first want to just point out is that our player, you know, made the really big life-altering decision to really halt his truest self, right? So so not only did he come out to his team and the current coach, then he had to endure like, oh my God, who's going to be the new coaches and how's that going to go? But he made the decision to continue and play the sport he loved. So therefore halting, full transition. So that in itself was just huge. But I mentioned before, he's a unicorn human, and his family is extraordinary. And this program in our university was extraordinary in handling it, our conference, really everything. So, he didn't begin hormones until he was done competing, which was a really big component. He had elected to have top surgery when he came out, so he could feel like himself. I think, I reached out to him coming into this and said, what would you want people to know? Like, what was hard? What was good? What was amazing? And he did, he said, I don't know, maybe it was an anomaly that I just felt so supported. But, I think I went into it saying, I'm going to look this in the eye and acknowledge it right away so that there is no wondering what I think about it, or if I'm trying to secretly figure out how I feel about it. And I just looked right at him and I said, hey, here's the deal. I support the shit out of you in this, and whatever you need, let's do this. But I just need you to know that part, and we're going to work through it. And he had reached out and said, explain pronouns. And so you wouldn't say she's going to go take grounders. You'd say he's going to take grounders. And really the transition, he said, was seamless. And then everything just, kind of just worked itself out. I felt like me as a human being, I became protective of him and the student in our culture a little bit more than I didn't expect that. I didn't know that I thought about it, but I definitely felt like you're just constantly on guard, waiting for what you assume could be a negative interaction. But I think really, kind of to circle back to everything, is it's about being a good human, right? And what I learned is that I was in a culture of really freaking good humans. And we just rolled with the punches, and we had honest conversations. And we just, again, I wanted him to know that he was 100% supported, but I think his teammates really built that safety net, and people just weren't afraid to say, what do you need here? And I think that is the message you can really take across all these situations we're talking about, even outside of this topic, the topics that the world is facing. But he challenged me in more ways, and I think the vulnerability that you're going to screw up. I mean, I was talking to my assistant about this, and I said, I said she once, and I was sick about it. Sick, not to him, but it was just enough that, and, I said, okay, you're not perfect, just, figure it out. And a lot of it is just ingrained habits that we're finding across the board in everything. But, it's a unique experience, but I also think it's a very prevalent topic, and we're hearing about it more. It's not this like, what? Conversation. And I think that's huge, because I think there is a way to find the balance of being able to be celebrated, supported, play the sport you love, while also being your true self. So.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that. Meg, I'm going to come to you. Can you talk about the importance of pronouns, why we're seeing those more often? I think you notice them in email signatures now. Just what should coaches know?
When we signify the use of our pronouns, and I'm going to say that I've learned a lot about this from my wife, who is a healthcare practitioner and has done a lot of work with LGBTQ individuals. But using pronouns and using the pronouns that a person prefers, again, honors their identity and their journey and where they are. And I think that that's really important. And as Amanda said, you're going to screw up. I have screwed up. And it's going to happen, but we can't be afraid to practice using those pronouns, because that is part of recognizing the diversity, but also the inclusiveness of what is important in acknowledging someone as a human being, but who they are and how they identify. And so, in healthcare, we're beginning to see organizations ask for those pronouns on medical forms, particularly in New England and in California. But when we're thinking about it in the way that we are addressing and acknowledging ourselves, our identities, that also allows for other individuals who might be saying, I'm not really sure where I fit right now, and I'm trying to figure this out. But by acknowledging the use of the pronouns, that opens the door for people to be able to engage and have conversations, but also ask that, why is that important? Because we want to make sure that we are honoring people for who they are and what they bring to the table. And like we said, it's about being a good human. It's not always something, because it's not a regular practice yet that people are used to, and we make assumptions. Oh, if you play, softball, if you play on the women's basketball team, you identify as female. And that is not the case. And so it's really thinking about how we can begin to open the door, open the conversation to allow particularly our college students to really begin to own and accept who they are as people, and how we can help them find their place and define their roles and their paths on our teams, in our communities, and in our society.
Joanna, can I continue a little bit? So kind of circling back there behind Meg, but so other things to consider, and the pronouns are a big one, right? Because that's just the starting point of it all. But things to consider too that we dealt with is making sure that he had locker room facilities, how we handled rooming on the road, gear. And one of the things that he kept bringing up is you're automatically going to be assumed to be female playing softball on a team full of women. And so that in itself is just hard to swallow, even being called women's softball. But being able to wear a baseball style hat, different pants, something that just made him feel more comfortable. But we had, if we knew we were going to have shower facilities, maybe at an away game, we would, hey, how do you want us to handle this here? Do you want something separate? Or if it wasn't there, then we had maybe he went first and then the rest of the team went. And those are the things that are hard at the beginning to learn, to even think about, like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that, and then it just becomes a habit. But that's because you've got to practice it over time and stay connected to the topic. Not, again, it's that whole checking the box thing and feeling like, oh yeah, cool, I'm calling him he, I'm nailing it. It's like there's far greater things here. And some of that is resources, and some of that is the layout of your campuses. I know for us, our women's teams, we all go into a women's locker room and then have a private team space. And so, some of that maybe wasn't necessarily feasible in the layout because of our, the resources we have in our building, but, and he even said, like, it hurt my feelings to have to walk into the women's locker room to go to my softball locker room. But at the same time, I also love the locker room time. So I think it's just being willing to have those conversations and think about all the moving parts and making sure that not only he was comfortable, but that even our current teammates, the new people coming in, are you comfortable being in this room with, with him being a male? So, it's all those moving parts that you think about. And how they really infiltrate your season as a whole.
Well, and one of the things that I think Amanda said so well is you asked him, right? You asked him what was comfortable for him, what he wanted, how he could be comfortable in that space. I think it's really important that we don't make assumptions about what a person needs, and that we ask that transgender athlete about what they need, how we can support them and give them that opportunity to voice what they need, how they're gonna kind of mold their experience, and what role we can play in being a part of that.
Thank you, appreciate that. Next question, total 180 here. If you have an athlete who is very religious and draws a religion argument or line on their beliefs, teammate, other athletic peer, that there's a wrong or a sinful, and I don't want to use the word lifestyle, Kirk, I'm trying to learn here, but how do you navigate that? Because you're trying to allow athletes to have their beliefs, yet you're trying to teach tolerance. Come rescue me, Kirk, help me out here. Is Kirk gone?
You're muted, Kirk.
All right.
Oh, there we go.
I said something brilliant. Here, listen, religions don't even have this figured out, because you have Christian beliefs, Christian churches, and there's a Catholic school here in California, and they're looking for an LGBT coach to get hired at their university. So to say that religion automatically assumes that this is the belief of all religion just doesn't fit. So I think you really have to, once again, go back to the core of what you have in common and what you're striving for. There are some great books out there. I can tell you that a book and a speaker that I brought up to Oregon State was fantastic, was Jay Mickelson. And I will get the name of the book before we get off the call here. But it was amazing because it literally took biblical verses and didn't necessarily turn them around, but just said, look, at its core, we're not here to judge other people. And what we should be focused on is the quality of the character of the individuals on our team, and not necessarily all the other, I'm going to use probably a bad word, dogma that comes with a lot of religions. Because you can have a strong faith, you can be strong in your belief in God, or any other religion that you might have. That doesn't define who you are as a person or your character. And I think, again, we want to always make sure we're focusing in our program that our diversity is our strength, and that we're focused on the character of our actions and not necessarily our individual beliefs in different religious situations. And I think that's where you start from.
Anyone else? Anything to add on that one?
Just to piggyback off that, I think one of the things, obviously, that we talk about in our program, and it's one of our core values, is that respect. And, and I think every member of your team, and it certainly can be for your athletic department as well, is making sure that you really work hard to agree to a common ground of respect, not necessarily agreement, or approval, just that there is that level of respect. And, I look at it this way, like, I don't really like cigarettes and smoking, but I don't hate everybody who smokes. I just, and we try to put out different scenarios with our team. And when we talk about different aspects of diversity and tolerance and so on, but just not agreement or approval, just a level of respect.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate that. Another question, and I love that we got this one because it just shows the willingness to have the conversation. Why is this conversation important? Why is this conversation one we need to have if we're focusing on, making better softball players, and then where does this fit? And I am, assuming it's coming from a good place, from a growth place. So we're gonna go there. Let's go ahead and Brandy, how would you do that as an administrator? Let you kick it off, and then coaches will circle around.
Yeah, I think obviously the question's happening right now, but if somebody were to ask me that question now, and I've had, when we talk about like the Black Lives Matter movement, I've had somebody say, well, like, when is enough enough? And I try to tell them, like, well, when we're all in the same space and we're all equal, that's when enough is enough. But you're speaking from a place of privilege, so it's easy for you to not understand why all these people are up in arms. So, I think that we have to have this conversation because we haven't had this conversation. And so it's very important to acknowledge the differences. It's very important to acknowledge that we all need to be intentional on how we treat each other, how we include each other, the types of environments that we cultivate, that we are all, in higher education, and that is supposed to be a space where people come as they are, and are able to grow and flourish and be the best version of themselves that they can be. So I think it's important to have these conversations because there is a lot that we all have to learn. It is very easy to hide in your bubble of assumption, or this is never going to happen to me. And I think it's very important to continue to, as young people say, like, stay woke, like, oh man, I didn't even think of that. I didn't even think that certain, people, whoever, are having to deal with the adversity of their life and who they are and how they live, and choices that we all make. And so I think it's important that we are doing this now and that we have such a diverse group of people, even on this call, who are willing to learn, who are willing to contribute to their departments, to their teams, to their communities. Because if we don't have these conversations, then we don't get better. It's the same question of like, well, why are we practicing? Why do I have to hit off the tee today? Well, because if you don't, then you're not going to get any better. So like, you have to continue to have these conversations, and also to acknowledge that like, we see you, right? Like, some of this is just an acknowledgement of like, you know what, we are different, and that's okay that we're different. Like, how can I learn more about you? Or how can I be a better friend, a better teammate, a better person for you? How can I support you? I understand that there are things that you're going to have to endure because of who you are. And because of who other people are, and it may be ignorance, but how can I be a better teammate and a friend and a neighbor for you? And so sometimes we have to have these conversations to realize that it's not just about us and our bubble and what we see every day, that we're a part of a bigger picture, and we need to be present and participants in that bigger picture.
One thing that I wanted to kind of jump on that Brandy had said earlier, and I think, again, this is such an amazing conversation, but I became very enlightened when I started to realize there was a lot of things that I always talk about diversity, and we want to have diversity, and we want to have diversity. But remember, diversity just invites you in the room, right? Inclusion puts you at the table. And then equity is about kind of leveling or kind of creating an equal playing field. So I think it's an important thing for any one of us to go back to our campuses and make sure when our departments are they checking a box by calling it a diversity committee and saying, oh, look, diversity is not enough. It's not. It's just having people in the room doesn't mean that we have solved what we're working towards. So I think, to me, I love equity, diversity, and inclusion because I think it really starts hitting on those key points. And I think it's important to talk to your administrations and your athletic departments about, hey, if you're on board for this, let's do more than check a box. But we need to talk about inclusion and equity, not just diversity. And that's an even larger task, but that's what we should be doing.
The one last thing that I'll add to that, and Kirk, you speaking brought this to light. Like, I'm sitting here taking notes as I'm hearing people talk, right? Because again, we're all supposed to be, learners of life. But it's also like a checks and balances. If you don't talk about it, then you never have to really like have accountability for what you're doing and how you're doing it. And so I'm sitting here listening to some of these comments, and I'm thinking, oh, are we really serving our student athletes as well as we think we are? Like, I'm sitting here thinking like, man, we have great, robust programs for our kids, and we're awesome. And, everybody loves each other. But I'm sitting here like, but are we as intentional as we can be? So again, like another reason why it's important to have these conversations is to really check ourselves in terms of how are we serving? Are we intentional in our hiring practices? If I look around the table on my executive staff of administrators who are making decisions for coaches, staff, and student athletes, do we have people in the room that reflect the people that we're serving? Because if you don't, I was literally sitting in a room with all men, and we were having conversations about how we should provide opportunities for women who wanted to nurse their children at athletic events. And not one of those men asked me, I have a 3-nager, not one of them are like, oh, well, hey, Brandy, what do you think? They're all, well, yeah, I think we should do it. And so finally I said, how many of you have breastfed a baby? Okay, so if none, then maybe we should just take a step back. I know most of you are gonna go home and ask your wives what they think, but like, we do not have folks in this room who are going to reflect the needs of the conversations we need to have for some of the people that we're serving. So, it is incredibly important to continue to talk about these things and to continue to have dialogue, because we really do need to get out of the rigmarole of just like being on autopilot and really stop and check ourselves to see like, are we really walking the talk? And all of the things that we're saying and how we're serving, are we actually doing that?
And one of the things that I want to add to how this fits is individuals who identify as members of the LGBTQ community have higher rates of depression, higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of suicide than just about any other demographic. And so it is important that we educate ourselves on the fact that we have students, we have colleagues, we have friends and family members who identify in this way. And I'll tell you, the struggle is real. At some point over the lifespan, I would guess, of any member of the LGBT community, there will be a struggle with depression. There might be a struggle with suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, or actual suicide. And I think it's really important that we recognize if we ignore it, if we choose not to listen, that we continue to do damage to the individuals who are part of the LGBTQ community, and especially when they're in college. And we know students, even though they have a team, they're still looking for ways that they can fit in. It is important that we are able to honor our students and our colleagues and our faculty and staff for who they are, and to open the door to additional mental health resources. And so one of the things that Kirk said earlier is, and Amanda said earlier, we might not know what to do. Give us time. We'll find resources. We will help make connections. But it is so vitally important that there's that follow-up and that follow-through with what those resources are.
Yeah. I want to jump on that, Meg. I thank you. That was awesome. I want to say a couple of things too to feed right off of that is, while everything that she is talking about is absolutely spot on true, being LGBT doesn't mean that you are mentally going to be vulnerable. It's part of the issue is being an invisible minority. And as an invisible minority, there's a blessing of that and there's a curse that goes with that. And what we do to ourselves by not disclosing who we are, we oftentimes put our self-hatred back on ourselves. Now, sometimes people don't self-disclose because they might be in harm's way, 100%. But I challenge each and every one of you on this call, if you are in a safe space, if you do feel like your job security and you're in a healthy place, your visibility makes a huge difference, not only to yourself, but what the example that you can be to your student athletes. Joanna, this was a question earlier about being an example for your student athletes. If we talk about female student athletes have grown up with a lot of amazing females as leaders that were gay and that hid their lifestyle, and everyone knew it. Everyone knew it. It was no secret on the team. There's been decades of that. Now, there's reasons why women were hiding their sexuality. I'm not denying that. But we have to understand the impact of that potentially pushes people out of coaching. There's a lot of women that might go, yeah, well, I don't want to be closeted, so I might move into some other profession. So if we want to talk about how we can make sure that female coaches are generated out of our student athletes, we have to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable to be visible role models on what it means to be coaching. And it doesn't mean that every LGBT person is going to be vulnerable to mental health issues, but we have to be real in understanding that as an invisible minority, the curse of hiding is what causes so much of that mental strain on our student athletes or on us as individuals that are in the LGBT community. I laugh about it jokingly. It's not a funny topic, but I'll say I have the privilege of being gay as a minority. I have the privilege, I can hide it, right? It's not on my forehead. It's not my skin color. It's not anything else. So I have the privilege. I have gay privilege as a minority, right? Because it's real. I have the ability to hide it, but I don't necessarily think that people understand when I self-disclose at every opportunity I can, when a parent asks or when I hear a conversation like Christian talked about in a diner and you hear something, when you self-disclose, you're actually putting yourself in harm's way to be discriminated against when I don't have to. But I think that needs to be celebrated, that needs to be encouraged, and that needs to be supported. That visibility, if you are in a safe place, is really, really powerful and important.
Thank you very much. So we've got a few questions left. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read them all, and then we're going to go around the horn one time, alphabetical order, all right? And then true around the horn style, you have 60 seconds to answer whichever one you want before I mute you. Okay, so thank you very much, all of you. You've been fantastic. A couple topics you can pick from, whichever one resonates. How can athletic departments implement policy strategies to make an environment more inclusive? There's one. What conversations have to be had to demonstrate your support of your LGBTQ athletes? 2, how can you help your department see the importance in having a Pride Night or a Black Lives Matter game or something bigger? Question 3. Or 4, are there organizations nationally, and we have made a note of all of them in the chat, so we'll send those out, by the way, but are there organizations nationally that you would recommend coaches get involved in? Okay, so you can answer any one of those. All of you choose to answer the same one, not a problem, but 60 seconds on the clock. Pat, Conlan, go.
Yeah, sure. I'll answer the first one that you asked, and I think that I've been, like I said, I've been very lucky to work at Georgetown, and it's not something that just happened magically. It was our athletic director actually looking at his department and saying, what do we need? Okay, I need to listen to my staff, and I need to figure out what we need to make this department stronger. And if our department is stronger, we're going to be stronger for our student athletes. And just this past fall, which was very interesting, he put a group of coaches together and made this diversity, inclusion, and equity committee. And it is rolling right now, obviously, with the events of the last month. It's been really powerful with our Black student athletes right now and our Black coaches. But the LGBTQ community is involved in that as well. So I'm excited about that. But I think at the end of the day, it's about an administration who believes in making sure that their coaches are taken care of, so they can then take care of their student athletes.
Thank you very much. And thank you for not making me Tony Reale and truly hitting a mute button. I appreciate that. Christian, let's go ahead. You're next, whichever one you'd like.
I'll probably answer the warranting having a Pride Night. So I think it was really big having that at Oregon. That way we could have visibility and backing from the university. Because I know, even being down here in the South, here in Florida, it's like, I'm worried, if I'm going to come off too gay, will I turn off donors? Or I constantly think while I'm standing at first base, am I standing like a gay person? Am I being masculine enough? And I've even had people tell me, you look weird, you look robotic over there. I'm like, yeah, it's because I'm worried that I'm going to turn people off. But just having that night was just so important for me, because not only was it able to be yeah, the shame that I've had on my life for 20 years, that's okay. I'm getting approval from the university that I have decided to associate myself with, and I'm able to live freely. And that just is able to, I can't tell you how important that was and how awesome it felt to have the whole university backing you in that, even just that one day. It's just really amazing. I think every university should be able to have it.
Thank you, Christian, very much for everything you've stated tonight. Truly appreciate you and your perspective. Let's see, Dr. Hancock, you're up next, whichever route you want to go.
Sure, absolutely. I posted a lot of resources in the chat box. I know that you all are going to get those, but I definitely think using something like Athlete Ally as a resource when you're thinking about where do we begin? Do we have inclusive policies? Are we really meeting the needs of our student athletes? It gives a great baseline for figuring out where to begin, and also gives language, which I think is important. But one thing that I'll caution you on is just because you have an inclusive policy doesn't mean that you have an inclusive culture and inclusive environment. It is going to take time. It is going to take resources. But one thing that I cannot stress enough is, please, I'm asking you this as a faculty member, use your campus resources that are available to you. You have experts on campus who are willing to meet with you, your student athletes, or help develop programming. And typically we're free. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about how you're building an inclusive environment on your campus.
Great advice. Thank you very much. Coach Scott, what you got for us?
Joanna, the second question was conversations we need to have. Is that what that was?
Yeah, what conversations need to be had to demonstrate support of athletes?
Yeah, so what stuck out to me on this one is just establishing an inclusive language and vocabulary, really, because the more you use those words and the language, the more comfortable and natural it feels. And that can be something as not asking your players if they're dating a guy, specifically, or do you have a boyfriend? It's, we use the word partners. We ask, are you dating anyone? And we use that in the recruiting process. And we talk about this isn't a, transformative time in your life. You're going to meet your best friends, your future partners. And we use the word human a lot because that just is what it is. It's all encompassing. And so I think it's about, that can kind of help you make, build that comfortable space to then have the conversations that are going to feel more welcoming and comfortable from your student athletes as well. Start with your team, work to your culture of your department.
Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate that. Brandy, you're up.
Yeah, I think a lot has already been said. What we try to do in general when we're onboarding all of our new student athletes is to do a lot of what Amanda was just talking about. And as we're going through different programming and different freshman and rookie orientation camps, we talk a lot about inclusivity. We talk a lot about, again, like our biggest message is be good neighbors, take care of each other, regardless of what that looks like. Again, you don't have to always like each other, but you will always love each other and take care of each other once you become a part of our family. And so just making sure that we set the tone and the expectation that we are going to tolerate each other, but that we are also going to learn about each other and celebrate each other. So I think that those are things that are important for us. This isn't part of the question, but it was part of my experience as a student athlete. So I'm just going to share this too. I also think it's very important that when you have family functions or when we have athletic department functions, that everyone is invited, everyone and their partner, everybody and their families. Like it's just, everybody gets to see where everybody, lives, what they look like, all of that. So I think that's incredibly important. I still remember that, my coach never openly talked about, her being a lesbian, but she always invited us to her home where her partner lived, where her wife lived. And, we loved Judy. She always baked great cookies and cake. I mean, we loved her more than we loved our coach, but it was just more about like, hey, come into my home, welcome into my life, welcome into my home. And that was, it was clockwork. You didn't even think anything about it. I mean, my family went over to, my coach's home, and they invited us into their home. So again, I think having an athletic department and an athletic director that creates that environment where family is family and people are people, is huge.
Thank you very much. Kirk, you're it.
I'm going to do a little composite of what everyone has said here a little bit. It's great stuff. I think feeding right off what Brandy said, I think, whether someone self-identified as a lesbian or not, the openness and the ability to be a great role model and example is something that's really powerful. I'll kind of go to the Pride Night conversation. I think, and I'll talk about the index at the same time. I think what's really important is that we have to be very authentic in what we do. So if you're going to be doing a Pride Night, make sure that at your campus, it's not checking a box. It's not just we throw a rainbow out there, we make one statement and we're good. I think the value in doing a Pride Night, as Christian talked about, it is incredibly powerful of a message to send your student athletes, your fans, your coaches, but you have to go beyond just throwing a rainbow up on one night. It has to be continual work. And there needs to be more behind the Pride Night other than just the name of it. And I'll say again, indexes are great, but those are checking boxes. And I've seen plenty of people on those indexes that score amazing and they have horrible cultures. They have cultures that aren't inclusive. So to me, just as Meg said, you have resources on your campus. I believe there's LGBT organizations and there's amazing individuals that are working in athletics and at the NCAA level that can be great resources that are LGBT that can really talk to issues. I think feel confident in pushing out and reaching out for those resources.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all very much for joining us, for sharing your time, for your candor, and just helping us grow and learn as a softball community. We are blessed to have such a collaborative group. And, we hear that from other sport organizations all the time. Softball coaches share. This is no different and more important in so many ways than what's your favorite hitting drill or pitching drill, Amanda. We'll come at you for one of those later. Don't you worry. But thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time. Again, this is available at nfca.org, nfca.org. Anytime under forums. You can access it if you're a member. If you're not a member, share with anyone who you think can learn and grow from this. And we truly appreciate you investing a Tuesday evening with us. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your week. And we truly appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, NFCA.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.